Hagim uzmanim l'sason, as we say in the business. That's the traditional response. Thank you, Mark. And thanks everybody for being here. Let's just take a moment to arrive, allow ourselves to come into this moment. Allow our bodies to arrive, our minds to settle a little bit. Just take 3 good deep breaths. Just check in with yourself. How's your body today? How's your mind today? How's your heart and your neshama, your spirit today? Just accepting what is, not wishing it were otherwise, but being clear about what is. Till last night, we had such amazing Sukkot weather here in Chicago, and then this morning it's damp and wet, and I had to stick the cushion on my chair in the dryer for a few minutes before I came out today. But I'm also happy it's stopped raining and able to be in the sukkah. So if you've been with us all week, you know that we've been, as Mark said, we've been exploring this idea of habits of the heart, which is a term that comes from Alexis de Tocqueville. But the what I would call the spiritual practices, the avodah shebalev, the spiritual habits of the heart, practices of the heart that are necessary for living in and sustaining a multicultural, multi-religious, multi-ethnic, multiracial, multilingual democracy, living in democratic life, and which is related so much to the themes of Sukkot and the inclusiveness and diversity that are expressed in Sukkot. And we've been using as our guide 5 habits that are identified by our teacher Parker Palmer in his book Healing the Heart of Democracy. And so we looked at all 4 of the first 4 of these in previous sessions, in understanding that we're all in this together, an appreciation of the value of otherness, an ability to hold tension in life-giving ways, a sense of personal voice and agency. And today we're going to look at the 5th and final of the habits that he discusses. And he says, and he calls this a capacity to create community. A capacity to create community. The steady companionship of 2 or 3 kindred spirits can help us find the courage we need to speak and act as citizens. Steady companionship of 2 or 3 kindred spirits can help us find the courage we need to speak and act as citizens. There are many ways to plant and cultivate the seeds of community in our personal and local lives. Note the organic metaphor. Many ways to plant and cultivate the seeds of community in our personal and local lives. Also the emphasis on local. We must all become gardeners of community. A beautiful phrase, gardeners of community, if we want democracy to flourish. And I note here, just, again, the Sukkot is this holiday that reminds us of the essential organic nature of our lives in community. One of probably my favorite teaching related to Sukkot is that the roof of the sukkah has to be made of formerly living material, of organic material, but that is no longer attached to the earth. Right. And the example is given in the Mishnah of if you had a grapevine that was sort of, grew over a pergola, it'd be perfect. It's a beautiful sukkah, schach, ready-made. But unless you cut the vine, it doesn't count. There is it needs to be organic, and it also has to maybe express the ephemeralness, right? A bit of the risk that comes from cutting, from letting go, but also that expresses the organic nature of our lives and of community. That in order to open and welcome into the sukkah, right, we create these open walls, as it were, and we invite guests. We invite spiritual guests, our ushpizin. Each night there's a custom. But even more, this is, Sukkot. My neighbor, a couple of houses down the other night, invited me over. He was just having some people over. He says, I love this holiday because the commandment, right, the invitation is just to hang out, just to be with each other and just hang out in the sukkah and to create community. So in relation to this teaching, I just want to bring in two other pieces of text, and then we'll reflect on these and sit together. Sukkot is, of course, the holiday where we read the book of Ecclesiastes, traditionally the book of Kohelet, and this teaching of Parker Palmer about the capacity to create community, and even, as he says, the steady companionship of 2 or 3 kindred spirits, right? It doesn't take much to create community. Brought to mind the pasuk, the verse from Kohelet, Tovim hashnayim min ha'echad, 2 are better off than 1. Skip the second half of that. For should they fall, one can raise the other, right? But woe betide the one who is alone and falls with no companion. So 2 are better than 1 because, you have each other. If my wife and I talk often in our marriage about, like, one of us has to be carrying the ball, and usually one of us is carrying the ball. Hopefully we're both carrying the ball, but sometimes you need each other to support, and one of you can carry the ball versus the other. And having the support of community, in Parker Palmer's words, the steady companionship of 2 or 3 kindred spirits can help us find the courage we need to speak and act as citizens. And one final teaching from Pirkei Avot, that Rabbi Chalafta of Kfar Hananya, love to have that name, Chalafta, said, when 10 sit together and occupy themselves with Torah, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, abides among them. As it is said, God stands in the congregation of God. That we know. It's a minyan, that's 10. How do we know that the same is true even of 5? As it is said, this band of hers, that's my translation here of the pronoun for God, she has established on earth, and is a reference to 5. How do we know that the same is true even of 3? As it is said, in the midst of the judges, the Holy One judges. And we know you need 3 judges to make a Beit Din, so that's 3. And how do we know it's even true of 2? As it said, then they that live in awe of Yud-Heh Vav-Heh spoke with one another, and Yud-Heh Vav-Heh hearkened and heard. If we just speak to each other, that the Holy One, that the Shekhinah can be present. And how do we know the same is even true of 1? As it is said, in every place, b'chol hamakom, in every place that I cause my name to be mentioned, I will come unto you and bless you. It's a wonderful teaching. And I think, again, is a reminder, an invitation to us that sometimes in our democratic life, again, we can feel so alone. It can feel overwhelming, and we can feel, especially today, so isolated from each other often. And yet what Parker Palmer and Rabbi Chalafta, Kfar Hananya, and Kohelet are all reminding us is that it doesn't take a mass movement all the time, right? In fact, that's not the starting point. That's not where the real power comes from. The real power comes within our own lives, within our own hearts, within our one-on-one or one-on-two relationships, just with even in the small company, right, of kindred spirits, of people with whom we can support one another and feel each other's support. So here on this last day of our time together, this is the invitation for our practice. So I'll guide us into this, and then we'll have some quiet time just to be. But if you want to assume a meditation posture, again, just find your breath and settle in it. A few good deep cycles in through the nose, out through the mouth. Softening and bringing tenderness to any spots in our bodies that might be a little stiff or sore or carrying anxiety, tension. As we bring our awareness to our breath, I'll invite you into the breath. Just be aware of every breath being renewed. Gift of each breath. And the awareness that we are not alone. If you're here live with us right now with 202 other people in this sit, or if you're watching it later or you're listening to it later, you're in the company of kindred spirits who are sharing this breath. Sharing this spiritual space and time across geographies, across Sukkot all over the world. And in that sharing, we create the space in which the Shekhinah, the divine presence, abides. Right now, we are creating a sukkah, maybe not a physical sukkah, but a spiritual sukkah. Every breath, every time we sit together, every time we direct our attention in the company of these others, we are dwelling within a sukkah together. And many commentators, many midrashim link the building of the sukkah with the building of the Mishkan, of the place where God abides, the Holy One abides. So in this spiritual sukkah, in this space and time together, right now, we're enacting the mitzvah, ve'asuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham. Make me a sanctuary, make me a holy place, that I may dwell in us, in you, in me, between us, in all of us. We are not alone. We are not isolated. But rather, we hold and are held in the embrace of the divine presence. when we feel alone and isolated is often when we feel least empowered or most disempowered. It's when we lose our sense of emunah, our faith and our belief that we can make change. But when we realize that we're not alone, that we are accompanied by friends and fellow travelers through whom we are connected, with whom we're connected through chesed, bonds of chesed, loving kindness and goodwill. With whom we make visible and present the divine presence. When we are aware of that, when we can carry that awareness in our hearts, anything becomes possible. We can sense our empowerment. As we close our practice this week together, these closing moments, let me just offer the tefillah, the prayer, that our practices this week help us tend to the flame of democratic life in our own hearts. It might be for our own benefit and those of our communities and those with whom we share our countries and our societies, that ultimately we are able to dwell together under a sukkah shalom, a canopy, a sukkah of peace together. If your eyes have been closed, I invite you to open them, and I'll hand it back to Mark. And please stick around if you can.
Amen. Thank you so much, Josh. And in keeping with the teaching and practice today of being aware of the Kedusha, the holiness of community, we end today, as we do each day, with an opportunity for those who are mourning to recite the Mourner's Kaddish, and putting the name or names of those who are honoring in the chat box now or after we recite Kaddish. And if you're not reciting Kaddish, you have an opportunity to apply the practice, apply the teaching by being present, creating a minyan of comfort and support for those who are. And if you are, I invite you to join me by rising in body or in spirit to recite the words. Thanks to Andrew for sharing the words on the screen. And you can unmute at this time. Yit Gadal, Kadash Shemei Rabba, Yama Dibra Yosef, Yisrael Chayon Yomechon, Chaye, All Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala, Yman Sarim, Pnei Rabba Barach Leolam Amen. Barach Yistabach V'Yitzha'ar V'Yitmam V'Yitnaseh
V'yitada,
V'Yitzalel
v'yitzalel,
V'Yitzha'ar
Risu,
Ela
Miko,
mikirkata
Mikata,
b'shirata,
Bashirata,
ushbekata
Ushpekata,
b'nechamata,
Benefamata,
amiram
Amiram,
ba'aman
Biama,
nivru,
Minu,
amen.
Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba
Ishlama
Shemaya,
min shemaya, b'chaim
V'chayim,
aleinu
Aleinu,
v'yoko
V'yako
Yisrael,
Israel,
Ruth,
B'Inu,
amen.
Amen.
Aseh
Oseh
shalom
Shalom,
lamam,
Birama,
v'yaseh
Aseh
shalom,
Shalom, Aleinu,
aleinu v'yoko
V'yako Israel,
Yisrael,
V'yako
v'yoko
Yosef,
Yosef
Tevel,
Yisrael,
Imru.
Imru, amen.
To that only brother. Prayer.
Friends, thanks so much for joining us today, as always. Thanks to Rabbi Josh Feigelson for leading us in this really beautiful series of teachings and practices to bring home and to absorb some of the central spiritual teachings of this part of the Jewish sacred season. And thanks to Andrew Schumann for holding it all together, keeping our sukkah upright and steady. And as always, you're invited and encouraged to stay on. If you'd like to just continue to use this community as a container in time and space to sit a little bit longer, you're welcome to do that and turn off the volume on your device. Or if you'd like to join us for some conversation or ask a question or share reflection on your experience in practicing this today, you're welcome to do that as well. If it's a question, please preface it by writing question in the chat. We'll keep an eye on that. Josh, it's a beautiful way to wrap things up. And there are two things on my mind that came up for me as I was listening to the teaching, looking at the text. One of which, just to be immediately applicable, is how palpable that teaching is for this particular group. who experience, I think many of whom come for that sense of community and are drawn by it, and drawn by the for the practice. But if it was just for the practice, people could always do it at their own time and their own convenience. But to do it in this kind of daily minyan that we have, and there aren't many places that have a minyan of 200 plus people that come every day and connect in this way. So I just want to invite you to reflect on that a little bit, if you would like, in terms of since you also host this group weekly and hold it, and shepherd this particular community. It's an opportunity for us to reflect on that aspect of what we're doing.
Yeah. I think I like to tell people, job obviously is representing IJS and talking about IJS a lot. And one of the things that I love sharing about the daily sit is, to me, it's this instantiation of a teaching that we find actually in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law by Joseph Caro, where he says, if you can go to shul with the minyan, you should go to pray with the minyan, right? If you can't, for whatever reason, you should try to pray at the same time as the minyan is praying. Mm-hmm. Which is like this weird thing to say in 1568 when he's writing. Like, what's the significance of davening at the? I'm at home, I'm not in the room, but I know that they start at 7:30 or whatever, and so I'm going to do it. And of course, this came about. This sit came about really during COVID, at a time when we couldn't gather physically, and it's still to this day this remarkable thing where hundreds of people want to come at the same time to turn on their cameras so they can close their eyes together, and there's this real reality. It's a spiritual reality. That's what I think. Joseph Caro is like getting at, is like, it generates this sort of energy,
vibes,
and yeah,
good vibes.
And so there really is something about tuning into that, and we want to share that time and space together. So, and clearly, there's such support, being able to do that, knowing that there are other people, and the relationships that have been formed, in this group. It's just been, we really should get a doctoral student at one point to come, interview a bunch of people and find out, like map all the relationships. So, and we're seeing it just coming in here, on the chat, some things about it. So I think, the vitalness of community for all of us, and this community has clearly been so important. And even one day, maybe we should have a meetup, have a big kiddush, and everybody who's been part of the daily.
I'll bring the sponge cake.
Okay, you bring the
Everybody
sponge
can
cake.
put
That's
in the
great,
chat what they would bring.
Herring. Yeah.
Herring. Yeah. You gotta have herring.
Right.
I would like a good kugel. Anyone want to make a good kugel? Here we go. Rugelach. All right. Here we go.
It's funny. There we go. All right. I see that there's some questions that have come in.
That's a good.
Okay.
Well, Lori's always got great questions. So here's a good one. When we, and this integrates everything, right? So Lori's asking, when we pray the words which we associate, Ufros aleinu sukkah shlomecha, spread over us the sukkah of your peace, when we gather with like-minded community, and with ushpizing, that's the tradition to invite in the spirits of our ancestors to partake of joy. Isn't it also important to invite those with whom we do not agree, those of other political standing, to try to better understand each other, create bridges rather than bifurcating, et cetera, et cetera? Okay. That's all. Yeah. That's all teed up for you, Josh.
Perfect. And I saw there was another question earlier on that kind of got to this, like, what do you do with people you perceive as weeds in the garden, to take the organic metaphor. And so what I would say is, again, and this goes back to some of the other practices we've also talked about earlier in the week, right, is how do we meet those moments of constriction that we might, first experience as constriction? Pause, right? Acknowledge what we're feeling, like create some more space between stimulus and response, which Mark is the great teacher of. And check with ourselves, like, okay, what's really going on here? What do I really know, right? What might I be projecting? What might I be painting with too broad a brush, or a broader brush than this deserves? How might I be using, short-circuiting my mind is allowing myself to label quickly as a defense mechanism, and an understandable one, but is that what the choice that I want to make, right? And how might I meet someone in the fullness of their humanity? And can I bring more chesed? Can I bring more rachamim, more compassion? I'm amazed we've gotten through this week without a reductio ad Hitlerum, whatever that rule is. But where, well, what about the Nazis? I feel like that always comes up. But I heard the story, I remember a couple of years ago, of a survivor, a woman who had been experimented on by Mengele, and who later in life, she wrote a memoir, and I think they played part of her talking about it. I forget the whole story anyway, but this part of the story that really stuck out to me was her saying she decided at a certain point, she realized she felt sorry for him. And that was her power. She actually realized, if I feel sorry for him, he doesn't have power over me. And it was this amazing use of saying, not in a way that I wanted, it wasn't a way of excusing or minimizing the suffering, but on a very profound spiritual level, being able to say, oh, right, you are a deeply, deeply damaged human being who is doing enormous harm to me and others, and I feel sorry for you, for that. It was an amazing response. And so that's way over there. Most people aren't in that category, right? So if that can happen there, right? What are other ways we might bring a more compassionate response to ourselves? So
well, I think it relates to the second of these five, I don't know what are we calling, the habits of the heart, spiritual principles, embracing otherness, where I think in this case, just to lower the bar, like that example you give is that's that's Mother Teresa level stuff, right? For the rest of us mortals, for
spiritual MVPs,
it can be just enough of a test, to deal with this in our own families, right? Or anyone we happen to be annoyed with, to get over it. But that second principle, which you combined on Monday, combined, so it didn't get quite as much attention, of welcoming the other as a practice, and even just noticing the inclination to other or distance or objectify. If we can get past that, that's progress, right? It doesn't mean you have to love, how can I love, this comes up, how can I love, it's like, whoa, let's just start with, how can I not just turn this person or this group of people and demonize them as monsters, right? Can I start there, right? And could I, this is a helpful thing that I've been using all week, and I learned this from Gil Fronsdal about, if love is too much to ask, and it's often too much to ask, what about goodwill? Could you just have goodwill, right? Good Shabbos. Can you muster that much? Or, and could it really depends what they're bringing the kiddush.
That's right. But can we, on some level, just recognize, everybody is somebody's child, right? Everybody has had the experiences they've had, and we all, no matter how different we are, the amount that we share by virtue of being human and having bodies and living on the planet already means that 99% we're in the same place, right? So, but it's hard work, and that's why it's habits of the heart, I think.
So that's one more thing before we close up. And I see Lori's request for prayers for her husband, and I know sometimes I miss these, I see it in the chat afterwards, but people often ask for support and prayers for family members or friends of friends or people in your circles. And so you want to send some love and support to you and your husband, Lori, and to anyone else who's in need of healing. The thing that struck me, Josh, at the end of the text sheet was the help that teaching that brings it down. A little bit reminds me of, Abraham negotiating with God about the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Of bringing it down, where that brings it down to 10, but this brings it down to 1 and says basically that you could have a community even with just one. You could have the divine presence even with just one. So I wanted him. I didn't want to let that pass. I think that's really for people who, especially for those of us who feel disconnected from community, whether it's this community or any community, but feel lonely, feel disconnected. That's a pretty powerful teaching right there.
Yeah. I think absolutely, and it comes like 2 Mishnayot after after another teaching, which doesn't take it all the way down to 1, or use a different verse for 1. Anyway, but I think at the end of the day, right? It's like that. Yes, the companionship of other human beings is vital. Lo tov heyota adam levado. It's not good for people to be alone, right? Chapter 2 of Genesis. But at the end of the day, what other people are just, again, manifestations of the divine, right? We are. That's what we're doing. It's like the line in Les Mis. To see another to see another person is to see the face of God, right? To love another person is to see the face of God. That's it. And that so all of that is in service of, when we're on our own, we don't actually need other people necessarily, right? They're very, very helpful. But at the end of the day, we actually can tap into, there is a larger presence that we are accompanied by and is with us. And so even if we're not able to physically be in direct relationship, that is available to us as well. And so it's a wonderful reminder. Yeah, it is a beautiful teaching.
Yeah, and as long as we're on show tunes, I'm also going to throw in Sondheim's "No One Is Alone" from Into the Woods. It's a good one too.
Yeah,
people might throw in some more. And I'm seeing in the chat, by the way, since we bring up this topic of community and some interest in having some extra time afterwards, so we'll take that under advisement for connecting. There's also been a thought about creating a Facebook group or another venue where people might be able to continue to connect in some way or share to build on really the remarkable sense of community that's possible even with just chat before and after our practice each day.
Yeah.
But so your suggestions are welcome on that front, and we're going to end here. And as I mentioned, we're not meeting live tomorrow, so just a reminder. So wish everyone a happy Hoshana Rabbah, which is the 7th day of Sukkot, which is kind of the pinnacle of the joy of the holiday and leads into Shmini Atzeret, which is kind of the sounding board for Sukkot, the 8th day, which is really its own holiday. And it's connected with Torah, and may everyone absorb a lot of simcha from the benefit of the practice this week and the beautiful teachings and the interconnection between the values of Sukkot and these spiritual principles that Josh has beautifully outlined. So wish you shalom and simcha in your sukkah, whether it's an actual, metaphorical, or virtual, however it is. And may you feel the warmth and love of this community. And for those of you who are experiencing challenges in your life of any kind. And we'll look forward to seeing you on Monday. Leading off next Monday, by the way, will be Rabbi Jenny Solomon will lead us in practice, and my colleague Rabbi Miriam Margles will be hosting that day. So beautiful week of practice next week. We'll look forward to seeing you then. But in the meantime, Chag Sameach to everyone, Shabbat Shalom, and many blessings to everyone. Be well.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.